For those of you who don't know us, I'm Hariana Dillon and this is Laura Kirsten. Laura is a clinical psychologist at the Nepean Cancer Care Centre and the New South Wales...
The chair of the New South Wales Psychology Advisory Network for New South Wales Health.
Yeah, so she's pretty senior in the psychology world in New South Wales. Yes, and we've worked together for a long time. So we thought in the interests of... sticking with the theme that we would actually talk a little bit about reflection tonight and what that means. And so we thought we would talk about how we do this in clinical psychology and psychiatry and what that might, the implications that might have for other people working in caring professions and in particular in oncology. So Laura, can you tell me a little bit about self-care in healthcare practice and for practitioners and why? What do you think matters?
Well, I think self-care is really important. So I think having nights like tonight where you get to connect with your colleagues is obviously a great way to engage in self-care. But I think self-care is really critical for maintaining and sustaining ourselves in healthcare. It's a tough gig. And sometimes it can be hard to feel the rewards. And so having some ways to engage in self-care that you take a moment to consider and deliberately think about will be, I think, is really important. And I actually teach medical students, and this is what I'm telling them from third year onwards is, you need to engage in that self-care and look after yourself because no one else is going to.
So as a clinical psychologist, what are some of your self-care practices?
So I've got my formal practices. So I engage in clinical supervision. So that's a really important part of self-care for me. And most psychologists and psychiatrists would probably say the same thing. Also, I engage in peer supervision. I get to debrief with my colleagues quite a lot. And there are other things which are about more around self-care in my personal life, so having my social connections, catching up with friends, family, I like cooking, I like gardening. I've broken my legs, so if you see me hobbling around, I'm recovering. I've just started walking in the past few weeks, so otherwise I'd be out there gardening a bit more, going for walks, getting outside. But also, there's things that I need to improve on. So having been immobile for about 2 months has really given me lots of time to think about self-care and look at the gaps, and I think things that I need to work on improving on my sleep and maybe a bit more exercise and laying off the chocolate a little bit.
Yes, as someone that previously used to walk a lot listening to podcasts, I've discovered that actually I need to not do that and just walk. It's much better for my mental health. So what does that kind of clinical supervision that you mentioned earlier enable you to do?
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about clinical supervision in psychology, it might be a bit different. So I've done some training with different health staff. I know for nurses, sometimes supervision is seen more as, observing someone's skill set. But for psychology, clinical supervision is really a chance to stop and reflect and think about how we perform in our roles. It's a formal structured thing. It's an arrangement that's set up with a person who is either a more senior person or another, a suitable colleague. And it's that time, and I do about an hour a month to sort of stop and think about how am I practicing as a clinician, where are the areas that I can improve, and just reflect on how I work as a clinician and what I can do to make sure that, I'm doing the best that I can. I see clinical supervision is really important for in maintaining good professional practice, for good safety and quality in our practice, making sure people are adhering to our code of ethics and practicing within their competency.
So you're working in a cancer centre. Mm-hmm. And how do the clinical teams support each other in this way? Is it kind of supervision that you're doing within that setting?
Yes, so it's a bit varied. So we do, so I think it could be better, but I do know that, I will get a call out from a team if there's been, for example, a number of deaths of young people. I've been approached and asked to provide some clinical supervision to the staff, maybe for that particular team, but also I might be asked by nurses, for example, to provide some clinical supervision or supervision to them as well. Yeah.
Okay. And so what you kind of described just there is, and some experiences that would be considered traumatic. So what's this whole idea of trauma-informed care? Okay,
so trauma-informed care is really about understanding that there's a lot of trauma that exists in our community, and we don't necessarily know who in front of us has a trauma background. And so what we try and do is have a trauma awareness lens when we meet with that person, and use that to sort of guide the way we work with someone. So what we're trying to do is try and make sure that the person feels that they feel safe for a start, that they can trust us, that they have a choice in what they're involved in, and there's a collaborative working relationship with their team, and also that that they feel a bit empowered in making some of those choices for themselves. Because having a trauma takes away a lot of sense of control. Having cancer takes away a lot of sense of control. So you can see that when the two come together, it can, be very overwhelming.
Just in your own practice, do you screen for trauma?
No, we do not screen for trauma. And I think the idea of screening for trauma is something that sort of gets floated around. I think that we're not very good at routine screening as it is. For screening for anxiety and depression has been spoken about for a long time in cancer care, but we're not really good at it. And that's a sort of an advertisement for my talk on Tuesday morning. But we do need, and so screening for trauma, I think realistically it's not going to work in a cancer setting, and I also wonder whether people will actually nominate whether they have had a trauma background. I know that clinically we might meet with someone and they might not disclose a trauma, even if we've asked them, have you had an experience of trauma in your past? And they might not disclose it in that first assessment session, but maybe a couple of sessions down the track, they may, even though we kind of have a sense that there's something there, they might not ever actually tell us about that.
And so there's a building on that, we often feel like we should be able to connect with everybody and have a positive, productive relationship with anyone that we see. Are there some people that you see clinically who really push your buttons that you find hard to connect with, and how do you manage that?
So that's an interesting question. So that, I guess that makes me reflect on what my values are as a human being and what's important to me. And I think fundamentally I believe that everyone should be treated with kindness and compassion. However, there are going to be those people who do push your buttons as such. And I know that relatively recently in my own supervision, I'd taken to my supervisor that I'd noticed that there were just a handful of people, so I've been practicing for about 20 years in where I'm working, and there were just a handful of people that I just didn't really like. I'd be like, oh God, I've got this person coming in, what's that going to be like? And then I took it to supervision, and we had a talk through it, and I really came in reflecting in that supervision session, realised that it's really those people with sort of that narcissistic personality that were sort of triggering me a little bit, like I was getting a bit of a physiological response to them, and so I think talking it through with my supervisor made me much more cognizant of that, and then makes me sort of stop and think about my own internal dialogue prior to going into a session, but then also think about, this is a human being who's come in with a need, who's going through something that's really difficult. How can I best serve them so that I show them that kindness and compassion? And I guess we've got that sense of observing ourselves. We call it the the objective observer. So in a session, I'm sort of watching myself in the session, talking to this person, thinking about what am I saying, how am I behaving, and how am I feeling, and just being mindful of that and keeping myself sort of in check, that I'm making sure that I demonstrate the values that I believe in.
So, is there anything else that you think we haven't touched on that we should talk about reflecting?
No, I just think that if you haven't got clinical supervision, I really recommend it to everyone. It's a really great way to talk through your work, your practice. It's not therapy, so don't go in there thinking that we're going to provide therapy. But it also is a chance to really, I view it as crucial for my self-care, and so I highly recommend it to everyone.
Yeah, and I think, so I just want to say thank you, Laura, for sharing with us, but I also would like to say we had a session this morning with the study coordinators where self-care and longevity and burnout were discussed, and perhaps there is a role for ANZUP and the community that we have to do some of these kinds of activities virtually, and so to have a supportive connection where we can have study coordinators, nurses or whoever to talk about their experiences and debrief and do that reflective practice. So thanks, and we'll hand back to Fiona and the teams.